This is a Space Marine I painted more than 10 years ago. And this is the new reworked version of the same model. And since I received an early copy of this new model from Games Workshop, I thought I might as well see how much I've improved. So today I'll show you all the tips and tricks I've gathered over the years to go from painting like this to painting something like this. And all of these can be used on your own models. Now I want to tell you everything that's wrong with this old model. But let's address the elephant in the room. Why the hell is my old Lysander black and not yellow? Well, first of all colors are beautiful. But also it was part of my Black Templar army. Back then I didn't know what I was doing. I kinda dry brushed everything and drowned it in a wash. So everything on this model is kinda messy, imprecise and muddy. Then you look at the Black Templar symbol and that is not applied very well. The freehand on his shield is questionable and the base is, dare I say, dog shit. So on this miniature, even if I painted it to a tabletop standard, it would most likely be an improvement. However, we are gonna make it a proper display piece. Before that, you could have noticed this black part on his cape. This is because there was a gap. To fill it, I've used a method that sounds absolutely mental, but it works. To fill the gap, I've applied a thick coat of Abaddon black paint and then sanded it down. It is very safe because it's paint. And yet it's fast because it's paint. So you don't have to use sprue goo and risk damage, or use milliput and wait for eternity. I've repeated this process a couple of times until you couldn't tell there was anything there in the first place. You'll see that this method works once the model is primed. Speaking of, I'm priming it not only with black, but also with white ink on top. This will make the details easily visible, and also building up those layers will be faster. And you know what? Since I already had my airbrush in hand, I decided to finish the inner side of the cape. This can be as simple as painting a cream gradient, so that's what I did. Of course, airbrush by itself is not a silver bullet. To make something really nice, it's a good idea to use both tools, not just airbrush. While airbrush will save you a fuck ton of time, the bristled counterpart is truly indispensable. But don't you worry, we'll use airbrush later for a special trick that'll knock your socks off. This time around, we are not painting Lysander that converted to Black Templars, but a proper Imperial fist. This might be a strange thing to say, but have you ever heard that to paint white, you don't use white? It's true, you should mostly work with shades of grey. With yellow, it's pretty similar. To build up a nice yellow color, it's a good idea to work through browns and oranges. Does it mean that you shouldn't use yellow at all? Well, no. But using pure yellow right away will make you hate painting, unless you wanna blast everything with your airbrush. In this case, however, I wanna build up that yellow armor more carefully. For demonstrative purposes, I decided to develop his front leg earlier. You can see how the middle of that panel is lighter and juicier, because that will be a reflection. If it's not obvious to you where to place the light reflections, you should take a photo of your mini in a black primer before you start painting it. Then from that photo, copy the reflection placement just the way you see it. This is not always necessary, but if you want a simple guide, I think it's useful. By the way, real quick, all the mentioned tips and tricks can be found in my miniature glow-up checklist from my newsletter. So if you haven't already, sign up to my newsletter for extra tips and tricks, as well as the glow-up checklist. Link is in the description. Anyway, you can see that early on I was being more messy with my paint application. And the further I am in the process, the more precise I gotta be. This is a general principle of painting anything. You can be pretty fast and rough from the start, but need to be way more accurate and intentional near the finish. Which is also what she said. It's especially important when you start highlighting the edges and shading the recesses, because you don't want to paint over what is finished. On top of that, when we look at the old model again, you can recognize this general sloppiness. The edge highlights are uneven, and that creates a messy impression. By trying to be more precise later in the process, you achieve that nice definition. And remember, one thing that Warhammer box art does really well is having nicely defined minis. In fact, the classic heavy metal style is built up on precise edge highlights and recess shading, which makes the minis nicely readable. As I go on, I'll make sure to maintain the same definition. Usually when I'm painting anything, I try to be very methodical. This time, however, I kinda abandoned the yellow armor to paint something else. The shield can be attached later very easily, so I am painting it in Subassemblies. There are 3 things worth mentioning about the shield. First, let's talk about the fist in the middle. Since it's almost completely flat, I've settled on painting it by using multiple edge highlights rather than painting any gradient. If you are painting heavy metal style black armor, it might look pretty similar to this. And you know what? This isn't my preferred way to paint, but since it is flat, I think it works just fine. Second thing, let's talk about the gold. Again, looking back at the old model, it's painted with true metallics. There is nothing wrong with using metallics, but for display models, they do look kinda cheap to me. So here, we are painting a quick non-metallic metal. Yes, it is slower than slapping on metallic paint, but that bit of extra time is worth it. Just so you know, this took me like 12 minutes, and I think it does represent a believable gold. Now skipping forward a little bit, let's talk about Freehands. The box art features 2 freehands, one on his shield and the other one above his armor. I've tried painting a freehand like this on my old Lysander, but back then I had brush skills of a baby. Today, I am way more confident. Instead of aiming for perfection and spending hours on it, I've tried to paint a freehand similar enough to the box art. Unfortunately, this is indeed where you spend hours if you don't have the build-up muscle memory yet. Still, compare it to a different freehand I did for my Parian model. This Pokemon right here took me way longer and required much more back and forth, but I am still very happy with the result. By the way, you'll find a tutorial for it on Patreon. Both of these freehands require the aforementioned skills that cannot be taught as easily. Motor skills. It's the muscle memory that you build up over the years, and it makes you way more precise when painting. Because of that, I am able to paint straight lines and nicely even edge highlights. And the reason why I mention this at all is because I often tell you that practice is not everything. Practice is only worthwhile when it's intentional or deliberate. But at the same time, your motor skills are improving every time you pick up the brush. And would you look at that? The shield is done. Going back to the yellow armor, some cleanup was underway. Although it still won't be finished for a bit, this is another feature of Warhammer box art I wanna talk about. All the box art is very clean. At this point we are totally bullying this guy, but notice how everything is kinda muddy. In a side-to-side comparison, notice how the capes are both kinda dirty, but the box art is also clean. What I really mean is that the box art can portray dirt and damage, or even weathering you see on the armor, but it's portrayed in an intentional way. My old version is dirty, but it's because I didn't know any better, not because I wanted it to be dirty. Generally speaking, when we talk about cleanliness on flat planes, we want to achieve reasonably smooth blends. So on this hammer, notice how I'm trying to be very neat to retain definition and keep the transitions quite smooth, so it's fairly clean. Okay, the hammer is finished, but I can't help myself from pointing out one thing someone mentioned when I was streaming. The hammerhead looks like it's jerking off. It's true! Oh my god, it's true! Anyway, going forward, I worked on various details. Remember, the smaller something is, the more contrast it needs, so it's easily readable. So for many symbols, I am using straight up black or dark brown color to outline them, which is fine in my opinion. Contrast is also necessary when painting non-metallic metal. Anytime I paint something reflective, you'll see that there are big differences between shadows and lights. It's this kind of contrast that creates a reflective impression. So just like that, I painted some more details until I got to the most important part of the model, the face. Perhaps I'll make a dedicated video about painting faces, but let's go through the basics. On this particular face, there are two opposing forces in play. On one hand, skin has usually low contrast, because it's not very reflective. On the other hand, this is such a small detail, it does need that contrast. So this will be an exercise of balancing these two forces. After the first few layers, I had to paint his eyes. This is for the exact same reason we started with the inner part of the cape. If I painted it later, chances are I would paint over some other finished part. The eyes are more hidden, therefore it's easier to avoid them later. Now everything I do from this point on is selectively highlighting the exposed parts of the face. And then later, also paint the hair. After some further adjustments, the face is almost painted. This one has a bit more contrast than what I would like, but also this guy has many wrinkles and he's a manly man, so it's fine. If I painted a Sister of Battle with this kind of contrast, or any other female model for that matter, it would give off masculine energy. We'll be finishing the armor with an extra trick up my sleeve, but some adjustments are still necessary. This comes down to filling in the unpainted parts, going over the recesses, and making the gradient less patchy. Another problem is that the true Imperial Fist armor is way warmer. But again, this will be fixed very, very soon. As I base coat the cape, notice how careful I am around the already painted details. This doesn't require too much focus because, after all, the outside of the cape is easily accessible. You still don't want to paint over the finished details though. At this point, I've started building up more layers. It doesn't matter if it's a bit rough, because at the end, I will use airbrush filters to blend the ever-living shit out of it. Blending the gradient with my brush will take eternity, but it can be done. However, by using both tools, we can achieve something very nice rather quickly. So after applying the lightest sketched layer, it's showtime! I am using a very thin consistency. We are talking like 10% paint and the rest is either water or thinner. First, I've used the same color as the last layer to go over the transitions. You won't really see that much of a change with the first few passes. After 10 to 20 passes, it should look way smoother. Now to get it even smoother and more juicy, I am using transparent red from Golden Acrylics. This makes for an excellent filter, because you don't want to cover too much, rather just modify. By going over the shadows and midtones, we achieve exactly that. This is also where the magic happens for the armor. We can make the yellow warmer and juicier by spraying this transparent red into the shadows. I want you to look at this panel. Now watch me as I apply a few filters over it and just look at it now. The difference is huge and I absolutely love it. And of course, we gotta apply the filters on the rest of the armor. After all that filtering and painting some minor details, I wanted to give him a special base. You might remember how I remade the base for my Death Corps of Creek Sergeant, and I thought something similar could work here. A simple, yet effective solution is to mount him on this natural wooden plinth. It's also the same color palette as the Tactical Rock. I like this new version of Lysander so much more. Not only is the sculpt better, but so is the paint job. It's much more striking, defined, and clean. Either way, you could have noticed I painted plenty of non-metallic metal here. And non-metallic metal is certainly a challenge of its own. So if you still don't know how to paint non-metallic metal, check out this video next because it'll help you with that. And see you there.